Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Plotlines. I'm your host, Connor, and today we are continuing our movie series with the Supreme Puntiff, Jeff himself. We are going to be talking about a French movie. This is kind of bizarre from my perspective. I never thought I'd be watching a French movie, but I guess after like the first time I watched The Passion, and since it's all in Greek and Latin and Aramaic,
Yeah.
it's basically a bunch of subtitles. And since I watched that, and I obviously I really enjoy that movie. Well, I don't know if joy is the right word, but it's a great movie. So I
Absolutely.
that made me willing to watch this type of movie, and it's covers a story that barely anybody knows,
Mhm.
especially in the Anglosphere. It's not something talked about. Michael Matt in the video before you watch the movie on the Remnant website basically talks about how it's been basically covered up or tried
Mhm.
to be covered up by the French Republic, or the French republics, I should say, because there have been many.
Mhm.
So it it's a quite interesting story that I never thought would have a movie. Anyways, Jeff, welcome back to the show. How you doing?
I'm doing really well, and I'm really excited to talk about this tonight. This is something that I read about many years ago, and yeah, just like you, I never thought it would be put into a screen, and I'd never heard it outside of that. So when you suggested that we watch it and then be able to do a review, I was really excited and overall very impressed with how well they were able to put everything together and put it to screen.
Yeah, it's as I've said, it's not a story told much.
Mhm.
You don't learn about it in any history class I know of.
Yep.
Uh, it's even though, and you really don't actually learn, in my opinion, from what I can remember, much about the other countries try under other kingdoms trying to squash the revolution. So then,
Yeah,
yeah,
I was just gonna say, in general, I think that most, Americans get a very superficial treating of the French Revolution as kind of a corollary to the American Revolution. Like, you hear about the tennis court oath, and then the guillotines, but not really much in between. And then, oh, out of nowhere, Napoleon pops up, and that's kind of it. Whereas there's so much to this story, including this incredible tale, as well as others of Catholic martyrs that were standing up to what ultimately I think was one of the bloodiest revolutions of secularism against Christendom prior to the 20th century.
I mean, also the introduction of atheistic government into society.
Yeah, absolutely. They overtly were anti-Christian and anti-Catholic, where they, took over the Cathedral of Notre Dame and turned it into a temple to reason. And they actually tried to replace the 7-day work week with a 10-day work week, and you just got the 10th day off. Like, it was just everything was trying to throw off the shackles of Christendom and overtly reject anything related to Christ.
I don't know if you heard recently Richard Dawkins' interview about being a cultural Christian and wanting to keep
Mhm.
around the cathedrals and stuff, but he's happy that they're empty and that sort of thing. Well, it seems like this would be kind of ideal for him. You still have the buildings, but it's to a cult of reason. Or
Yeah, and the French revolutionists actually like saw that need to still have some, secular celebrations in place of feast days. So like they actually tried to set up these like feast days for cabbages and like other plant life. They tried to like, make secular celebrations that were never going to actually be able to replace the true joy around the resurrection at Easter, the birth at Christmas. All those things cannot actually be replaced, but they did whatever they could to try to replicate. They tried to undo what Saint Boniface did with chopping down the thunder oak. They tried to, put pagan secular, atheism in its place, and it was never going to satisfy. And we see more than any that the Vendéans just wanted nothing to do with it from the beginning. They saw straight through how absurd it was, and they just rejected it outright.
Indeed. Now, this is not an episode that is supposed to be a history of either the French Revolution or the Vendée itself. I am doing a series on counter-revolutions and counter-revolutionaries, and there will be a episode dedicated to the Vendéans as a whole and their counter-revolutionary movement. But that is not this. This is going to be mainly a movie review, but I do want to give people some context for the story.
Yeah, and it's good that you'll have others on to speak about that, because I'm sure they are far more educated than I am. Just the little that I do know, I want to be able to share in case you're, like you said, if your audience doesn't have that context.
Exactly. Now, this movie, Michael Matt says in the introduction, he says that it took France kind of by storm last year. I don't actually have any I don't know any evidence that supports that necessarily. I thought I looked at the box office, but I don't know. It didn't seem that large of a box office. But then again, I don't know how small the French box office is.
Yeah, that's fair. I actually looked up, I was curious what the IMDb and Rotten Tomatoes reviews looked like. And Rotten Tomatoes had no reviews whatsoever, positive or negative, from audience or critics. And looking at IMDb, it was interesting being able to see, you could search based on where the reviewer was from by country. In France, it was relatively good for the most part, and then a decent chunk of just 0 stars. And the more Catholic countries like Poland and Belgium had it much more favorably reviewed, and then the US was 81% 5 stars, which I'm assuming is partially to do with the fact that Michael Matt brought it to his audience. They're more likely to view it positively, and he's the one that was able to provide the subtitles. But I did find that at least somewhat interesting, that the more Catholic countries were more supportive of this movie than the more secular countries like France and Germany.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense that the more Catholic countries would be supportive. And one of the big problems with France, I imagine, is the reaction to this as part of their history, because this is part of their Republican history, and that is what they have. They have a republic, and you can't have the republic without the evils that take place in the Vendée.
Yeah, absolutely. The French national anthem is Le Marseillaise, which was written about a particular region in France during the French Revolution, overthrowing the tyranny of the monarchy. So it's baked into their very identity in their current state.
Yes, and they're on their 5th republic, I think.
I don't know the specific number, but I know that it's well over 3.
Oh yeah, it's definitely well over 3. The 3rd republic was, I believe, in the 1870s. So let's think.
I think that was Napoleon III.
Well, post Napoleon III.
Okay.
And then the next one was after World War II. And then the next one was the 70s, actually.
Yeah, there you go.
Which is crazy, because I don't know if you know this, but Charles de Gaulle couped the French government in the 70s or 60s or 70s. I don't remember.
Yeah.
Really, really recent. Just the fact that a Western nation was couped like that. Obviously, I think a lot of people think there's been coups in other ways, but this is like a military coup. It seems a little different.
Yeah, absolutely.
But anyway, so I mean, the movie takes place in 17, I think it's 92.
I think 1793 March is when they start.
Oh, is that when it starts?
I could be wrong, but
92 or 93, one of the two.
one of the things that was interesting with that is like one of the first time cards they put was that started in March, but in French it was Mars, which is the Roman god of war.
Which makes a lot
So
of
that was
sense.
March of either 1792 or 1793 that we begin in this story.
Mm-hmm. And Charette is the main character of the story, and he is basically hiding away at his estate. And he is a naval officer. He was a Royal Naval officer and he participated in the American War of Independence, which is a really interesting connection for us as Americans. I mean, we often don't connect the American Revolution with the French Revolution as much as we should, because what the American Revolution is what bankrupted the French government and mainly led to the French Revolution happening.
Yeah, it is very interesting how hyper focused we are on that, because it wasn't that we necessarily beat the British in our War of Independence. It's that they lost the will to keep fighting for us. It just was no longer worth it, partially because they had so many European enemies that they were having to fight against. So they're just like, these American colonies aren't worth it. We're just not going to deal with it anymore. Let's give them their independence and let's go fight these things, which is the same thing with the War of 1812. That was the Napoleonic Wars happening in Europe. So they barely cared about what was happening here compared to, the threat of Napoleon taking over all of Europe. So I agree, like just in general, as Americans, we get so hyper-focused on our history that we don't take into context the larger things that are happening in the world. And yeah, you're absolutely right that the French were participating partially in our War of Independence to, help do harm to the British Empire, but they ended up doing more harm to themselves in the long run because they were bankrupted.
Well, I would also argue that internal politics is what really lost the British the American Revolution. The Whigs were not supportive of it because they saw themselves in the American rebels. They were almost as against the king as the American rebels were. Just they were against the king in a different way.
Yeah. Sorry, just 1 second. I had to step away for just 1 second.
No problem. So anyway, so Charette is this naval officer. He is a veteran, and he is a royal officer. That means he swore his allegiance to the king. He's also a knight. He has this noble lineage, which he is the youngest of like what is it, like I think 7 sons or whatever. There is like 7 sons and 3 sisters or whatever. Anyways, he comes from a really large family. I might be wrong about the exact number, but anyways, the point is that 3 daughters, 7 sons, and he's the youngest. So he's from a large family, and he is the youngest, and he had a lot of basically exceptional ability in mathematics. So he joined the Navy, and he was the least interested of all the generals of the Vendée in taking up arms against the French revolutionary governments. And that's mainly because he did not think that they could win. I mean, it seems such a unlikely victory that they could possibly eke out, even though in some ways they were very close to a victory, and they were unable to finish that or get that victory, mostly because of things like betrayals, as well as dishonorable peace treaties and stuff like that. So the French Republicans were able to use the honor of the Vendéans against themselves.
Yeah, which is not the first time we've seen it in history. It's not going to be the last, but it's really interesting once you've watched the movie to see the transformation from beginning to end. Because in the beginning, like you said, he is absolutely like dead set against, like, there's no point in taking up this fight. And towards the end, you see that he is the one who is, the most diehard. We must uphold our honor and not give in and get rid of all of our honor. So we'll get to that at the end, but it's just interesting to note from the outset, like, that transformation from beginning to end is so complete for him.
Yeah, he seems like something of a melancholic. Once he committed himself, it was all or nothing. There was no other option. Now, the way the movie sort of depicts why the Vendéans are fighting stems from two main issues: mass conscription, which was the first time in history where like massive amounts of people were forced into the army to go fight the enemies of the revolution.
Yep.
Now, these people are it's basically Austria, Prussia, England, the Netherlands, all these different, and Spain, all these different countries are trying to put the Bourbons back on the throne of France in order to basically prevent the revolution from continuing and from spreading. And this is an interesting war because now most wars are fought over land, or maybe a claim to something. Some group has a claim over sea rights or something like that. But this war was not for land, at least not from the eyes of the enemies of the revolution. This was a more of a counter revolution war. And so it's it's really an ideological war opposed to a normal war, I guess you could say, that you might think. Though I think a lot of wars since the French Revolution have become very ideological. They're not really, fighting for their honor or the best for their people. They're fighting for something else. And part of this ideology is basically a reorganization of society. And part of that is dechristianization. And the element of that is that in the new constitution, all priests had to swear an oath to the republic. And the priests that signed this oath were called juring priests, and those who did not were called non-juring priests. And all the juring priests were excommunicated by the Pope for basically betraying him and saying that the French government had authority over them and not really the Pope, which is kind of at the heart, and it's also the heart of, St. Thomas More execution in England in the 1500s. So a lot of these things are just being brought up from the past and sort of in a new radical way. So do you have anything to add about that?
Yeah, I think that it's just important for everyone to, like, we've mentioned it before, but to understand that the very foundations of the French Revolution were directly anti-Catholic. They were, and the actual actions of the revolutionaries was to try to stamp out any form of Christianity that didn't recognize, the secular government as supreme overall. So when it comes to this revolution and the response of the Vendée, it was trying to overthrow everything that these people in the Vendée knew. They knew loyalty to the king. They knew loyalty to Catholicism and the Pope. They had the priests there. And to then hear not only that everything they believed was being overturned, but that they were then being conscripted and had to go fight and die for this cause they didn't believe in was like, I can't personally imagine. Like, it's almost to the level of if we, actually saw the downfall of America, it became communist, and then we saw our sons and daughters get conscripted into the military. Like, that's the level of social upheaval that was happening here. And before they even went to, get Charette and convince him to help lead them, there was a really powerful scene where they were doing the conscription by lot. And you see one of the, loyal townsmen who was a part of the local government say, like, oh no, my son's excluded because I'm doing my part. And let the peasants...
he's like a municipal officer. That's what they say.
Yeah, exactly. That's right.
He's a part of the government.
Yeah, and so his son was excluded, and it was just a direct contradiction of the three supposed pillars of the French Revolution: liberté, égalité, fraternity. Liberty, equality, and fraternity. All three of those things were turned over in that one initial scene alone that led to the spark that then blew up into the flame that was the Vendée Revolution, or counter-revolution, as you put it.
Well, I actually think that it fulfills all three, actually.
Yeah.
You think it... I think it is fraternity, égalité, or equality, fraternity, because everyone is equally disposable. It's just that...
except for the municipal man's son.
Well, no, but he's not.
He was higher.
But he's not part of the system in the way that they want you to think he's a part of the system. It's still part of equality. It's just that, basically, he's more equal. I mean, that's kind of but that's what they say about communism. The point is what they're trying to do is achieve equality, which they are. It's just equally disposable. And it's not that he wasn't disposable. He was disposable. The other guy was. It's just that he was being disposed of in a different way.
Okay, that's fair. I think we're saying the same thing in different ways.
I'm just saying they're not breaking their model of belief system. It's just becoming obvious what their belief system is. But when they try and say, oh, equality, fraternity, what am I missing?
Liberty.
Oh, liberté. Yes, they're talking about it in the context of of taking you, like liberty, taking you away from your liberties in the way that you see them, but giving you the freedom to do what they need you to do, basically.
No, so yeah, I guess I do agree with that. I just think that it's like that scene is exposing their actual hypocrisy. Like, internally it does make sense to them, but like for us outside of that, especially without a forced draft in this country anymore, and God willing it'll stay that way,
there's the draft. Or not draft. There is. Well, there's.
You have to register for selective service.
Yeah, selective service.
But there isn't currently a
not an active draft.
Yeah,
There's not an
But
active
I'm just
draft.
saying that
There is a
we
draft.
can see the hypocrisy of what they're saying. Internally, you're
Mhm.
right, it is consistent, but we can see the hypocrisy within the system, that's all.
Yeah, well, that's the thing is everybody always sees the what they really are only after, because the Vendée didn't
Yeah.
rise up even right away when the king was executed. Like,
That's true, it's 4 years later.
the no, I
Or
don't
sorry, no, 4 years later from the initial revolution,
revolution.
not
No,
from when he was
it's only like
executed.
a year, I think,
Mhm,
since he was
mhm.
executed. But the people of the Vendée were very much willing to accept the changes that were being made by the revolutionary government until it affected them in the way in the most personal ways that they cared most about.
Yeah.
So when their young men were being taken away from them to fight in a war that they would never that would never have happened under the king,
Yeah.
uh, because conscription, mass conscription was not a thing. And then with the priests being taken away and
Mhm.
being basically uh, ousted from society, at least the good priests, as they called them,
Yep.
were being forced from society, and they had to hide them away, and had to accept these non-juring or these juring priests,
Yep.
who they saw as traitors and pathetic human beings, were being forced upon them. This is what woke them up to the terrible situation that they had been brought to. And this is what brings them to march on Charette's house in the movie
Mhm.
to demand that he lead them into battle. Now, it's amazing because we think of peasants, especially in the French Revolutionary context, we think of them basically marching to like burn down noble houses and stuff like that. And this is the complete opposite of what we expect during this time. And the reason for that is that the French nobility of the Vendée were very good nobles. They stayed in their area. They stayed at like their estates. They participated in life alongside the peasants that worked their land. Most of the nobility of this time had been living at the court of Versailles and basically shirking their responsibilities.
Yep.
But the nobility of the Vendée were doing the exact opposite.
Yeah, and one of the things that I love, again, we talked about the fact that he was reticent to pick up the mantle. I think that it's one very understandable, not only because he saw it as a war that couldn't be won, but he was a naval general, so he wasn't trained in land battles.
Yeah, exactly. He was not like this was not his uh this was not his thing. And he didn't have a commander or anything like that. It wasn't like he was an admiral. He wasn't in charge of some massive military force. He had nobody to order him around. He was basically on his own, and these peasants come up to him, and I believe in the movie this isn't how it's done, but I believe it's said that he hid under the bed.
No, that's not how they do it in the movie, but that's
No.
interesting. I did like how they did it in the movie where he was hiding like around a corner and one of the peasants uh whose son had just been killed said this Charette is a coward, and he took his hat and like was trying to put it on, and as he was walking past, Charette holds a sword up to his throat and is like, who are you calling coward, basically.
Well, and he
And
says, "Wait outside, and I'll be,"
yep.
you know. Anyways, then he summons them to to be a part of his army if they really want him to lead, them. And that, I mean, he's very, they do him very good as a commander. He is very motivational. I wish I knew French, because it would probably come off even better if I knew French. But even just reading the English subtitles is, sort of gets my heart going, and stuff like that gets me excited about it. Though of course I knew it was coming, and I knew a bunch of the story going into the movie, so I knew what to expect, but still it was exhilarating. And he's basically like, I'm going to do this until I die, until I win or die, which is literally the sort of basically the name of the movie.
Yeah. They really, like you said, I think that they did portray him accurately, because he was able to convince and lead so many, that he was the type of leader that, you would follow into battle against the pits of hell. He had that charisma, and he had that ability to, excite hope where there wasn't any. And it's just such a fascinating thing that he went from having to be coaxed himself into, like you said, probably a melancholic. He had to be coaxed into the decision, and once he was there, he went fully in, and there was nothing that was going to stop him.
I put the link to the movie in the live chat, so if anybody is interested and had not seen it, I really suggest going and watching this movie. Of course, it's historical, so it's not like there are any real surprises of what happens, because it's very accurate to history. But it's incredibly worth it, and it's just incredibly motivating, and at the same time depressing, which is literally our time. That I feel like that sums up our time. There's a level in which we're being motivated, and at another point we're just very depressed. Those are the two emotions that we have going. Do you think that the actor who portrays Charette kind of does he remind you of Hugh Jackman?
In Hugh Jackman as a man, or in any of his particular roles?
No, like look.
Like the look. Yeah, I could see him playing like a younger Wolverine, especially with the mutton chops, pretty well.
Well, it just makes me think of obviously this actor is very good, but I could have, this is kind of the role I would have wanted to see Hugh Jackman do. Because
yeah, and this is something we mentioned before we hopped on. I overall, I absolutely second your opinion. This is a movie absolutely worth watching, and Michael Matt and the Remnant did us a great service with providing it to us, making it available with the subtitles. It's something that needs to be heard, this story. With that being said, as they did a phenomenal job with what they had, but you can tell that this is a story that was a little bit more fast paced than perhaps it needed to be. A lot of the big set piece battles, they had to stick with small jump cuts between individual fighters, because likely with the budget that they were working with, they couldn't afford Lord of the Rings epic style battles. It had to be a bit more limited. So the actor who played Charette, I think, did a phenomenal job. But I do agree, if we could have had a big epic movie done with somebody like Hugh Jackman stepping into the role of Charette, that would be, I would watch that any day of the week. No questions asked.
Well, that's why we don't have heroic figures in movies that are worth aspiring to. Hugh Jackman keeps playing Wolverine, but Wolverine isn't relatable.
Jean Valjean is, though.
But that's another French Revolution.
Yeah, but that was the student revolution in the 1830s, not the French Revolution as we know it.
Yeah, that one still stunk too.
I loved that movie, and I would be happy to
Okay.
debate you anytime about that.
About the merits of the 1830 revolution?
No, about the merits of the movie in and of
Oh,
itself.
okay, never mind, sorry. I haven't seen
Yeah,
the
no.
movie. I'm talking about the actual revolution itself.
Oh, absolutely. I agree with you there. And
Okay.
so, one of the things, very quick aside, one of the most poignant moments in that movie is Marius singing about his lost brethren that are gone, and it's just so wistful. It's like you've died for nothing, basically. So like, it talks about how pointless that revolution, quote unquote, was. So it doesn't portray it as a good, honorable thing to aspire to. But anyway, sorry. Back to back to
I'm not sure.
Vanquish.
It was a little farther off. Um, Max in the chat. Welcome to the chat, Mac. Thanks for joining us. And then, oh, where were we? So he calls his force or calls his men to basically stand by him and to follow his orders. And they basically they go into battle. Uh, he brings together men to go into battle with him. He has his sidekicks kind of. They sort of like they didn't make it as much of a buddy movie as it could have been, like a sort of a buddy sort of buddy romantic death stuff. Like romantic meaning like I'm not talking about like man
You're
and
not
woman
talking
romance.
about man and woman relationship.
Yeah,
You're talking
I'm
about
talking
just
about.
idealistic.
Thank you. That's what I'm going for. Idealism in the romantic sense, with a great leader and his devoted soldiers, kind of thing. Like I think they did it partially, but they weren't as successful because they didn't have as much time or focus on the characters. I don't know what you think
Yeah,
about that.
yeah. I think that something you could kind of compare and contrast it with, because I think that there's a lot of parallels here, is with The Patriot with Mel Gibson. Um, he was also a kind of an unwilling eventual leader of a guerrilla warfare against a bigger um, army that he was having to face against. And in that movie, kind of like we said with potentially bringing in a Hugh Jackman type, there was the presence and the opportunity for more charisma and more personal relationships to be developed. And I think that if this movie had, an extra 30 minutes of runtime, they could have developed that more. But they just, I don't think, quite had the resources to be able to spend towards that end.
It's also hard sometimes to remember, in my opinion, like details about certain characters because of just having subtitles. And of course,
That's
that's
fair.
that's sort of my fault in my own way. I need to learn French apparently.
No, you don't.
Just for this one movie, I need to learn French. Um,
Yeah, one of the things that I dislike about watching movies in subtitles is if it's good and important enough for me to actually spend the time on, I know that I'm missing out on so much, just like you said, because we're not listening to and understanding the original language being spoken. We're having to have it translated for us. So I really enjoy it, but I also like catch myself where I'm just reading the subtitles and I don't see the face and the reactions that they're having throughout. So
Max
I
taunting me.
yes, we.
Yes, he's taunting me in French. Um, anyways, yeah, I agree with. There's something missing with that. And then he puts together his team. He's got his cavalry officer. He's got his sort of his lieutenant general, who's basically just his a very loyal former military officer, and he's got his priest friend, or his confessor, basically,
Yep.
which is a really nice bit that is in that. I don't know much about like these little details because I don't think they're usually covered in most tellings, even in like history books and stuff like that, where you can find this information. Like this would have been stuff that they would have had to do really detailed research about to learn this stuff, or
Yeah.
they are just using some creative license in this. I don't know if they are, but it's definitely logical.
Yeah, I think it's very true to the time, even if it's not all confirmed, I'll say.
Yes, and there's also, his sister is participating in this, and I forgot to mention that he does have a son in the movie. I don't know if he has a son in real life.
Oh,
Um,
yeah. I
I
did
didn't.
not look into it.
I couldn't find anything about that, but that doesn't mean it's not true. And there's also these women they call their Amazons, who are sort of fighting with them. I also don't know how true that is, but I do know women were a huge partaker, not necessarily in the battles, but like accompanied their men to the battles, because there's a point in where the men begin to flee and they run into the women who are basically won't let them pass and basically force them to go back into the battle.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the most shameful things you can imagine, is being, shamed back into battle by women who are willing to face what you aren't.
Yeah, exactly. And also just your own women, like not just
Yep.
like random women, but your
Yep.
own women who like you obviously had conversations about like why you're doing this and that you're going to battle and that sort of thing. And like, part of this is that their original battle strategies, like because they don't have like um they don't have like trained warriors, they don't they don't act like that. Like
Yeah.
they don't
They don't have artillery, so they have to go to guerrilla warfare.
exactly. And their guerrilla warfare is incredibly successful, and which is kind of interesting because guerrilla warfare is usually sort of referenced as, I mean, we get the name guerrilla from Spanish,
Yeah.
because actually in the wars in Spain during the Napoleonic wars, that's the kind of tactics that the Spanish have to use against the French. So it's interesting that like 20 years earlier, the Vendeans are using it against the blues, as they call them. So they're the whites, and the Republican troops are the blues.
Yeah, and that actually could have been partially because, like you mentioned, Charette was involved with the War of American Independence. Mel Gibson's character in The Patriot is based on a few different actual historical figures. One of whom is Francis Marion, who's actually I'm descended from,
Oh,
and he was there's a national forest named after him in the Carolinas. So he employed guerrilla tactics during the Revolutionary War. And I have absolutely no clue if Charette encountered it from there, but it was being employed there in an overall war that he was involved in. So I'm guessing he at least had heard some of the tactics.
yeah. I mean, I doubt he sort of like saw it or anything like that, since he was a naval officer and would have only shown up when like either delivering supplies or participating in a blockade or something like that.
Yeah, but
But
the
yeah,
main
he could
point
have
just
heard of it.
being, yeah, he might have heard it. But you mentioned something kind of interesting. So they were known as Le Bleu, the Blue. Um, just to kind of stick, one of the ways in which France has still stuck with that, obviously their soldiers don't wear that anymore, but their French national team, the for soccer, they're known as Le Bleu
Well,
still to this day.
well, when is it like plural or is it singular? The blue or is it the blues? Because they
Well,
were called the blues in.
I think it's I don't know French, but I think it's the same plural, Le Bleus.
Okay, gotcha. Interesting. So, I mean, yeah, blue is very much in, blue and white are sort of the antagonistic colors with the
Yeah,
French within France.
yeah, and I loved that like they showed the very historical fact of what's hanging over your right shoulder, that the whites were wearing the Sacred Heart badge as what, like, because they weren't just any army, they were God's army.
Well, the Catholic and Royal Army.
That's exactly, but they were not just tied to anything secular, it was for God.
Well, everything was connected because of altar and throne, because of the
Yeah.
concept between uh, the church and the king himself. Because of course the coronation
Yep.
of a French king is deeply connected with Catholicism,
Yes.
and the king had. I mean, the king of France, unlike some other countries, like the history of the king of France being one of the first, being Clovis, who was baptized and basically brought the Catholic faith to the rest of France because of it. That's very different from other places where you might have someone like Saint Patrick or Saint Columba or Saint James.
Cyril and Methodius in Russia.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, other saints did bring Catholicism to France, but the basically the almost missionary of the faith on a greater scale was Clovis, a king.
Yeah, and that's why France was known as the first daughter of the church, and also why it's so sad to see the current state of that nation.
Yeah, and but it's interesting that, as Michael Matt says, this had a big effect, and if this history is sort of made the focus of more of culture, they won't be able to hide from it, basically.
Yeah, and this is an area where there obviously were martyrs, and it's something that I would love to see a current or future pontificate canonize those martyrs, because like we saw, at least in the portrayal within the movie, that Charette was not a perfect man, but he not only was dedicated to living out his sacramental life, but he also died because of the hatred of the faith. It's because he was sticking to his Catholic guns that he ended up being killed ultimately. So
Well,
I'd
yeah,
love to see that at some point.
indeed. Well, you're moving us forward, which is great.
Sorry.
No, I said great. That's great. Into the because I it's a great introduction to the next sort of aspect of it. So they become very successful in these guerrilla tactics, and they bring and they oh was it they actually bring over to their side one of the blues
Yep.
named Pfeiffer, and he becomes important later on. But
Mhm.
then they celebrate their victory, and let's just say it's not uh the most moral celebration. They're
Yep.
basically getting drunk, and their priest is trying to sort of corral them, and he makes an appointment for confession the next day.
Yeah, it's like I'll
um
need it.
yeah, it's like, oh, don't worry about it, father, we'll settle this in confession.
Yep.
So it's that kind of thing. It's that it's definitely, he's an imperfect man, but he knows where he needs to basically put his faith, he knows where his morals should be, even if he can't live up to them.
Yeah, that's where you can see that at that point in life, he's at continence, not true virtue. That's where you like generally do the good, but you still desire and occasionally indulge in what's not good.
Yes, and it's, in some sense, it's like off-putting to see this great hero do this, but also it makes him more human. I mean, it makes him way more relatable.
Absolutely, especially for any man that is daily having to face the the reality that he could die. It's hard to, have great judgment against, indulging here and there. It's not that it's right, but you can understand it much more. And it's again just like it's showing that overall spectrum that he starts where he didn't want to fight and now he is fighting and he's not perfect and he continues to grow throughout the movie. Like he doesn't stick in that role even though you see him in his imperfection there.
Yeah. The success of the Vendée was immense, that the Republican forces had to send in different generals in order to combat them because it wasn't going very well.
Yeah, like what just to, spoil a little bit, which is again it's history, it's not a big
Yeah.
spoiler, but over 200,000 Vendéans were killed in this time. And that's certainly not all soldiers. Huge amount of those were women and children that were killed as well. But like this was a massive battle over a small rural part of France. Like this isn't a part of Paris. This isn't in Marseille. Like this is a small backwater that's causing a big enough backlash against the Republic to end up with 200,000 people dead.
Yeah. Oh, and just sort of a somewhat of a break in the conversation. I just would like to ask everyone watching, if you're not subscribed, please do. Please like the video. I'm only like 23 subscribers away from 2,000 subscribers, so it would be really great to get those numbers up, to finally hit 2,000. I'm really grateful to all those who are all those who are currently subscribed, and I really can't express how much it means to me. But if we could get to 2,000, that would be really awesome. But yeah, so we have you talked about the death toll, which is absolutely massive, and we're about to get to sort of more of that about the history of it, or the showing of it in the movie, and part of that is because of how successful the Vendéans are in their campaigns, is that eventually the Republican troops move towards sort of extermination tactics.
Yep. Sorry, I have to get my charger on.
Your computer's dying?
There we go.
Okay, good. But anyways, so the depictions of the sort of extermination attempts are incredibly gruesome and very, emotional, and would be quite scary for anybody very young, kids and stuff like that. So this probably isn't that type of movie for kids.
Yeah. They were very historically accurate in what they showed and talking about the infernal columns where, they went throughout every part of the countryside that they could and basically killed anyone they could find. But there was so much more brutality that was shown in reality than they were willing to put to screen. And I support that decision because the actual tactics that were used are beyond comprehension.
Yeah,
Uh,
one of the most gruesome was drowning people, which they kind of did show a little bit of, but um they called it they did something which they called a Republican marriage, which was they had a man and a woman, and they stripped them and they tied them together and drowned them together in the river.
yeah, they would actually push them out basically on a pontoon and then sink it.
Yeah, it's incredibly disturbing. That was not part of the movie, which
Yeah,
is probably pretty good.
yeah,
That wasn't what the movie was for, and they did enough showing of the evils that happened on of these people of the deaths, that they didn't
yeah,
really need to get into that kind of well, nudity and stuff like that.
yeah. Agreed. I think they showed the brutality without being gratuitous.
Family members dying, that pretty much everybody has lost somebody, which also propels the Vendeans further in their fight because they have less to lose and they have more disdain for the Republicans.
Yeah, towards the end, he mentioned specifically that they fought with the fury of despair. Like they had nothing else. They weren't afraid of death because life held next to nothing for them, so they gave it everything they had.
Yeah, I mean, if you remove everything from somebody, basically, this is why like unconditional surrender is also just so evil.
Yep,
Even not even if like this, it's not as against such good people as in the
yep.
Vendée, but just everywhere. If you don't give your enemies a honorable way out, it is going to create way bigger problems.
Yeah, you have to, and even Sun Tzu talks about this in The Art of War. You have to allow an escape route essentially for your enemy, otherwise they will fight with the fury of despair.
Yes, and though despair is not what the Catholic and Royal Army and Charette are fighting with, because they do not despair because they have God and they have Christ's sacrifice, as
Yeah,
well as I mean, they have their trust not just in this world but outside of it. Um, so, but they are fighting for with nothing to gain or nothing to lose
yeah.
on this earth.
Yeah, you're absolutely right there. Charette, just shortly after he talks about that fury of despair, when he's talking to his last remaining lieutenants, says, our fight is eternal, and basically that they're going to win. So even if so they had when it came to their hope for winning the natural victory over the Republic, they despaired, but they knew that ultimately Christ had already conquered and he would supply that eternal life for them. And he was even talking about that desire and that joy of being able to go to those that he had led.
Indeed. The Now, one of the things that they don't talk too much about necessarily, or they don't have as much of in the earlier parts of the movie, has more to do with sort of their loyalty to the king, which is brought up more
Yeah.
later, especially as they sort of come to sort of peace terms with a no with a former nobleman of France who has joined the Republican cause, and basically silent or the quiet part of the agreement. And this I don't think is historical, but I do think is a really nice touch to the story. But it might be, it's since it is a secret, then it's very possible that it wouldn't be written down or anything. That in exchange for peace, because the Vendeans had been so successful and the Republic wanted the war done with, they would give Louis the 17th, the son of Louis the 16th, over to the Vendeans, since he had been in the Republican custody, and the child had been abused and treated extremely horrible, ripped away from uh, his uh, his parents and his mother, and it's just absolutely horrible. Well, so the agreement is, part of it is freedom of worship, um, freedom to still keep their armies around, and part of it is that they would get Louis the 17th back. Was there another part of it? Am I missing part of the treaty?
No, I think that was the majority of it. And one of the things I think that speaks to, like, assuming that that was historical, because we don't know for certain, is that if it was accepted with that being part of the agreement, it does speak to the charity of Charette with believing the best of intentions from the others, because in general we should have, like, we should default to believing the best of others unless they have given us reason not to. So you could either argue that it was charity or naivety that led him to that, because
What if it was neither? What if it was just the duty?
that's absolutely a possibility as well. You're right.
Duty to the fact that his king is imprisoned, and he has a way, or he thinks he might have a way to get that king back.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, because he even says that, he might be wrong, but if there's a chance, he has to take it. Yeah, that's a very good call there, Connor.
I think it's duty, loyalty, and sort of just nobleman characteristics in this situation, because
Yeah,
I think I, like, at least in my best moments, I think I'd be willing to do something the same way, at least from if I had somebody like that in loyalty to, um, because it's not necessarily about success or not. It's about, did I do everything I could for the person who I'm obliged to do everything I can for.
yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. And I think it also, they portray it somewhat, not, I think that some of this may come across just from the translation, but they talk several times about his panache and like his dedication to that, like keeping the feather in his cap to be a target. I think that it has a more egotistical translation in English,
Yeah.
but I think that it's I more so. I think it really ties back to chivalry. You
Well, I
know,
think it's actually, is it because it's a plume, right?
Well, yes, but what I was talking about is just it's ultimately like with that panache in his hat and just in general, like what you're talking about, his dedication to duty. It's this is what is right. This is what needs to be done. A naval officer doesn't remove the target from himself.
Well, I think it's also a bourbon symbol.
Oh,
It's a symbol of the monarchy, I think.
okay.
So so it really isn't like the way we think of it as like a something. Oh, what is it? Like, what'd you call it? And it comes off of,
Egotistical.
yeah, egotistical. I think it's actually more of a symbol of loyalty and
Yeah, and that's kind of
making
what I meant
sure.
with chivalry, with just that sense of honor in
Yes,
general.
Indeed. So I think if I'm not mistaken, because he does he does wear something, and I think that's what it is that represents
Mhm.
the Bourbon monarchy on his person. So, and he
Yep.
becomes the head general of like, or he becomes like he's actually bestowed by I think it's Louis the 18th. I I need to keep track of this. Louis the 18th. He's bestowed a title, a military title, like some sort of general position, um,
Yep.
and it's in the movie they sort of play fast and loose with his relationship with the Count of Artois,
Yep.
and stuff like that. The brothers of Louis the 16th, who are now carrying on the cause, um, mostly because they don't have the time. Like, there's a part where they they when Louis the 17th is dead, which also I do really like the scenes where you see Louis the 16th kind of in Charette's dreams, I guess, sort of
Mhm.
talking to him, like urging him on, kind of thing, like, or sort of like, I don't know, it's just very emotional and very um strong part, and a good addition that some other directors might not put into the movie.
Yep.
But there later, after after they learned that Louis the 17th's dead, and they basically the Republicans have betrayed him. He goes back into warring, um, and uh, it doesn't go very well. This time around, and eventually he has a meeting with who he thinks is going to be the Count of Artois, who's going to join them, but he doesn't, and he sends another his aide de camp, his another nobleman, to give him a sword. But what's interesting is they left out a part which was the landing of the emigres, in which a battle takes place between the emigres and the Republicans, and the
Mhm.
emigres are driven into the sea. So,
Yeah, they even showed the emigres like getting ready, but they didn't show that landing.
well, no, that's the second. So there's two things. Um,
Okay.
they didn't do at all the landing of the emigres,
Yep.
if I'm not and then later on, there's supposed to be this meeting with the Count of Artois that doesn't happen.
Okay.
That those are two different points in like the campaigns.
Mhm.
But the point is that the he does get angry, he does get frustrated with the princes. He says, he's quoting I think Psalms or Proverbs, maybe, I can't remember what it is. Not to put his trust in princes, but they did try and land to support the Catholic and Royal Army, and they were just driven off. So they did try. I think the movie kind of portrays it more like they're sissies, kind of, in some sense, like wimps, and they
Yeah.
don't participate. Um, so
Yeah. I agree. Something else I thought was interesting was specifically like after one of their big victories, Charette talks about their decision to split up and cover more than just the region of the Vendée, and that was their ultimate downfall. And especially having this come from the remnant with Michael Matt, like all I could think is just how sad it is that as like good Catholics, we don't have to be trads, but just as good solid Catholics, we can't unite over almost anything. And like the Unite the Clans movement has never come to fruition, and it looks like it's hard pressed ever to. So just in general, having the split of different motivations and like the focus on what drives us apart rather than what actually separates us as we are united in Christ. We still, we see that today, but we also see in this story that it was that decision to split up, to allow, fighting on all those different fronts rather than staying united to a single cause, like ultimately led to their downfall and the death of everyone in their groups.
Yeah, and I do think, well, I think it actually, part of it also is lack of uh like firm leadership
Yeah,
over like somebody to fully rally around. This metaphor doesn't really work as much, though. You could argue that the point is that once we have an extremely virtuous pope, you could imagine that no longer being a problem. And I think you could make the argument that but the movie's making, I guess, is that, I mean, they want you to believe that sort of the princes failed them because he had
yeah,
15,000 men. If that had only just, they had only had the landing of the princes to
yeah,
join them, that might have changed everything. Because then there isn't this scattered uh, group of clans. Then instead there is one united force that has one loyalty that they
yeah,
need to follow, and they don't have that in the Vendée in the way that they would like to. They have the one sort of one eternal loyalty, but they don't have the human loyalty that they need.
yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, I mean, the great thing about this movie is that I think, and I hope and I pray that it creates interest in other stories like it. Like, I would
Yes.
love to see movies about, I don't know if there are movies about Louis the 16th, but there is an amazing book about Louis the 16th. Oh, I can't remember what it's called, but it's written by Bernard Fay. Um,
Hmm.
I think it's like the Louis the 16th and the End of the World. Um,
Yeah.
it's an
I,
amazing book. It made me cry. Like, it's a history book, and it made me do that. Like, just imagine what a um a movie based on it would look like.
yeah, and I'd love to see one about the Reconquista or a series of them. The longest running war in history was the Catholic reconquest of Spain from the Moors. It took 770 years to fully drive out Islamic rule from the Spanish peninsula. And it had some of the most famous people within history, like El Cid, that would be phenomenal to see actually put to screen. Same with, like, we saw a little bit of this with There Be Dragons, but the Spanish Civil War in the 1930s. Um, Warren Carroll described that as the last crusade. Those are the types of things that there are so many amazing stories out there to be told that just aren't being picked up.
We have too many Last Crusades because in Michael Davies briefly uh, briefly calls the Vendée also the Last Crusade.
Well, this one was in the 1930s, so
I know,
that
so it
was at
doesn't.
least slightly after.
No, but I'm saying they're
No, I agree.
like these guys are alive around the same time, so it wouldn't make, writing. So the point is, it's just funny how there's so many sort of um Last Crusades.
No,
Uh,
you're not wrong.
we don't have like, um because these have been mostly more disorganized, the modern ones.
Yep.
It's not as clear, like what's a crusade, what's not a crusade. Like, we don't have numbers for them anymore, because there's not as much unity around a goal.
Yeah, and so often it's attributed to what it wasn't actually connected to with the Catholicism. They connect it to, nationalism and fascism. Like, It's not connected to
Oh,
the actual root of why people are fighting.
sure. I was thinking also like the Papal Zouaves, you could argue, as a crusade as well.
Yeah, you're not wrong, and whether it's called that or not, I'd love to see more things about true, authentic Catholic uprisings against secularism displayed, or against
Or even just
the
a formal fight. Like it doesn't even have to be an uprising. Like because the Papal Zouaves
yeah
isn't really an uprising. It's just a straight up conflict, sort of what you'd imagine a standard conflict actually.
yeah
And
yeah you're
actually
right.
it would continue the Charette thing, because we could do his nephew, who
Yeah,
was a member of the Papal Zouaves. So which would be great is if like those people that made this movie then make a Papal Zouave movie. I could see that happening.
yeah, I would love to see that happening.
Now, uh, you know, the Charette basically says that after the princes have failed him, he's basically being sent to his death. That after basically he had 15,000, he's left with like 2,000 or less or something like that. And
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, the Republic gets tired of fighting this, so they sort of give in on the priest situation. There's Napoleon's in the background, also um affecting this types of thing. The stability of the French Republic is declining, and they basically eventually restore the non-juring priests, so they have their good priests back. They have less of a reason to fight, but Charette is battling until the bitter end.
yeah, and part of that is because he knows that they won't be shown mercy. He's seen what the Republic's mercy looks like when you try to capitulate with them. And you can understand when two of his lieutenants decide to leave and argue for their surrender, and then they end up being summarily executed with no remorse whatsoever, where
Yes,
they're not
bayoneted to
even
death.
yeah, exactly, they're not even allowed to be shot. They're like, save the powder, let's just stab them with bayonets until they bleed out.
Yeah, it's not
um,
worth it. It's not worth them even, uh, using some of their bullets and stuff like that on them.
yeah.
But and anyway, so this hatred for them still continues, even if they're letting sort of the religion of Catholicism back into
Mhm.
practice. The hatred still is there, and then Charette is eventually hunted down and captured, and he I believe so in the movie, he asks for a priest and he's told no, if I'm not mistaken. But in reality, he did ask for a priest, but he was granted a juring priest.
Oh.
So basically, he did his confession with the juring priest and then got his absolution from the non-juring priest while he walked to his execution.
Yes. So in the movie, he was able to speak to his sister, and she told him that if he nodded to the priest, he was told where the priest would be, then the priest would give him absolution, and that would be a valid confession, essentially.
Well, it
Uh,
could be it could be general absolution.
yeah, yeah.
So
But yeah, he told his sister he wanted two things done, which I thought were very noble. Again, I don't know how accurate it was. One was to receive absolution from a priest, and the other was he wanted all of his debt settled,
oh yeah.
which again is a very Catholic thing. You don't want to leave others that you're in debt to without properly paying them back what they're due, just as a matter of justice, and also to avoid any time in purgatory for not paying back what you actually owed others.
Mm.
um, so I just thought that was a really powerful moment. Like, the last two things he wanted were for his sister to settle his debts and for him to receive absolution.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about the debt thing. That's very interesting. So thanks for bringing that to our minds. Uh, Another part of it was that he wanted to have his sword on him, uh, and they wouldn't let him because for fear that he might kill himself. Which he has a great line about how, like, don't they know, like, sort of, don't they know that my religion doesn't allow that. um
Yep.
Something
Yeah.
that to that effect. I'm not doing it
Yep.
justice.
But
And,
yeah, in the movie, they were saying, or he was requesting to be able to shave, and
oh,
that's why
that's
they
what it was.
denied him
Shave.
a blade.
Sorry, my bad. It wasn't his sword. It was just he wanted to shave.
Yeah,
um
they said, it's not, the afterlife isn't a ball. Like, you don't have to worry about that.
Anyways, he's and the guy who had made the original deal with him, who more or less betrayed him with
Mhm.
the Republicans, who's a former nobleman, or a nobleman who sided with the Republic, is at his execution, and basically gives him the or he asks for the ability to sort of nod, or sorry, lower his head for uh when he to allow the execution, basically to
Call for, he wanted to be able to say basically when to call for
yeah,
fire.
yes, and he did that, and um that's more or less the end.
Yeah, that was a hell of a moment that they had in the movie when they just showed him walking up, seeing the casket that he was going to be buried in, knowing he's in his very last moments. Like, it was, to me, really powerful, just imagining myself in that scene. Like, if I knew I'm walking within 5 minutes, I'm going to be dead, and I'm seeing what I'm going to be buried in. That was a really, like, just powerful image to have to confront.
Yeah, I mean, it's the end is satisfactory ending to a heroic story.
Yeah.
um and the Vendée is in some ways successful in, in their in many of their goals, failure, but Catholicism was maintained in France, um, because of the Vendée. It was proof that they could not destroy the religion as they wanted to.
Yeah, we're not working under a 10-day work week these days, are we?
Exactly. Um, and it's also, it just shows the resilience that people have, especially if they put their necks on the line for their principles. They might uh, save others as well. That may not. You're It's a sacrifice for others, and the as they say, the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. Um, there's Even though it seems like these sacrifices, from a material perspective, is in vain, it's not. And
Yeah.
these types of stories need to be told. You said sort of you want to see like Reconquista and that type of story told in film. I almost think that's not what we need at the moment. We need more, like, tragedies, because
Mhm.
that's what we're living in, and we need motivation to show how to live with the tragedy.
Yeah, you're absolutely not wrong. And a lot of the Reconquista is tragedy. Like, it took
Sure.
770 years to get
Yes,
there.
but it won.
Yes, eventually, but at the same time, at the end of time, Christ will have won as well. So even if we don't see it in our time, even if we don't, if it isn't seen for hundreds of years, there will be, an ultimate victory. And yeah, exactly, from Didymus, the
Yeah.
Crusaderos also deserve some good film time.
There is one movie on the Cristeros, isn't it?
I believe there is. I'm not sure. I can't remember which one it is.
For Greater Glory, isn't it?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
I'm going to be watching it, I think, because for an Avoiding Babylon episode.
Okay. Nice.
But I haven't seen it, so it'll be quite interesting. But I do think For Greater Glory is about the Cristeros.
Yes, it is.
And I wish There Be Dragons is an interesting movie. We might have to review. We might have to discuss that as well. But it at some point leaves a lot to be desired because it doesn't.
I would agree with that.
It doesn't give you at least the story I want to hear or I want to see.
Yeah.
It tells an interesting story to be sure.
But yeah, there's very little that's spoken about that's directly like thousands of Catholic priests and monks and nuns were executed in that Spanish Civil War. And it was almost as devastating to the Spanish countryside when it came to like the monasteries that were there as the English Revolution was.
The bloodiness of like towards the priesthood and the bishops.
Yeah.
Way more terrible than the French Revolution. I believe only 2 bishops in the French Revolution were martyred.
Yes, but there were groups of nuns that were asking their Mother Superior for permission to go and be executed by the guillotine. So it still definitely happened plenty in the French Revolution, but not nearly as explicit.
Not to the hierarchy, though. To the religious, yes, but not to the hierarchy itself.
That's a fair point.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see a pro-Franco movie, but I also would be really interested to see a pro-Carlist movie. To see both, sort of, to contrast the two would be quite interesting. Like, if we live long enough, or if that ever happens, and Jeff and I get to, review those types of movies, I think we'd really enjoy that. Or, maybe one day I'll write one of those, I would love to write these types of movies one day, maybe, God willing. And if God decides that's part of my path, that would be spectacular. I would be so excited to write these types of movies. And this is great inspiration that it can be done even maybe on a smaller level.
Yeah, and looking at the level of production quality, but also understanding it's not a bunch of, visual effects, it's not a bunch of CGI. They were able to tell a very compelling story with smaller set pieces, and they really, in my opinion, did this story justice.
Yeah, the battle scenes were a bit clunky sometimes, I think. But I would say the scenes where it wasn't even like you saw fighting, where they were like in uniform and marching and stuff like that, I think those were better scenes than the actual fighting themselves, because they actually portrayed sort of the drama.
Yeah, I enjoy a good set piece battle where you look at, the military tactics that are used. I don't think that was critical to this particular story, so that's where they didn't put the money into it. They showed the switch from, big battles to guerrilla warfare, and then, kind of the counterinsurgency where, like, in just brief snippets, they showed Le Blues, setting up where they, it looked like you only had 3 soldiers. They retreated, and then there were a bunch more waiting to assault after that. Like, it was small things like that, but that wasn't the core of this story. The core of this story was Charette and the lieutenants that he had. And I think that they told a really good story with that.
Indeed. I'm almost amazed that this movie exists. Like, I'm just like, there's part of me that's shocked. That this came out of France, and B, that we have the privilege of watching a movie that came out of France that wasn't released in the United States, which it
Yeah.
should. It should be released in the United States, like as a. Though, of course, not enough people would go to see it because it's subtitled.
Yeah, and at the same time, you and I did a review previously of Mass of the Ages Part 3, Guardians of Tradition. And like the core story in there was the group of mothers of traditionalist priests that were leaving from France and hiking all the way to the Vatican to present those letters to Pope Francis. So there, as much as I enjoy a good anti-French joke as the next guy, there is hope, there is goodness, and there is beauty still in France, and hopefully it will be able to reassume its title as the first daughter of the church within our lifetime.
I do believe that there's a strength within the French people that is just covered by banal Republican garbage at the moment. So
I agree.
I can't say the same about the America, unfortunately.
I think it's there too. It's just covered in even more layers of garbage and materialism.
Maybe, yeah. We'll see. Should we take bets on what comes first, the conversion of America or the reconversion of France? I don't know. Should be interesting to see. But yeah, so I endorse this movie wholeheartedly. Jeff?
Absolutely. There's nothing that would keep me from saying any Catholic or somebody who's a fan of history should watch this movie and see something that is very often overlooked, if not downright ignored.
Indeed. And we want to see more of this, more of these
Yes.
types of movies. And we'll what's the next movie we're gonna review? We're gonna review
it's either the Emperor's Club or the Dead Poets Society.
What do you think we should do first? Should we do the sort of the nihilist atheist thing, or should we do the
we've done a lot of really good pro-Catholic stuff. I think we should kind of deconstruct the nihilism within Dead Poets Society next.
Okay, it's the one I know. I haven't seen Emperor's Club yet, so that'll be interesting. Also, looking at it from a different light, I think
before we do it, I think you should watch both. I'm going to rewatch both of them when I get the chance. But if you have the chance, I think it really helps to just like see them back to back and see the difference there.
Possibly. We'll see how that goes. Anyways, but we also have a bunch of other. Well, we have other movie reviews. I have a playlist in the description. There's been many reviews on this channel. Jeff not part of every one of them, but go check them out. Some of them are also TV shows, but sort of movie connected TV shows. Movie and TV discussions. So go check that out. If you enjoyed this podcast, again, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. Do you have anything to say before we go, Jeff?
Thank you for having me on. I always enjoy getting to do that. And if anyone is interested, there is a conference called Restore Traditional Womanhood. My wife helps to put it on. It's from our parish in Colorado. So if anyone is interested in that, please search it out. It's a really worthwhile time. They've had some great speakers in the past, including Michael Matt. He was at the first one, and Diane Montagna. So there's a lot of good things happening there. So please check it out if you are interested.
Awesome. Do you have a link that you can put in the description?
It's called Restore Tradition is the website, and I can send that over to you.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you, everyone. God bless. Bye.